working. Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much, Barry, for that introduction. And this is my adapted presentation that I've given at a couple of stamp societies. I'm very glad to be here. I'm very glad to be talking about my collection, which is the Statue of Liberty on stamps. I should say from the outset that I am more of a topical collector rather than a thematic collector. So all the items in my collection feature the Statue of Liberty in some way. So as opposed to illustrating a theme on stamps, I'm actually more likely to be using Statue of Liberty stamps to illustrate themes rather than it being a theme itself. But because I collect the Statue of Liberty on stamps, I have things like this in my collection. This is a souvenir packet that was sold in the gift shop at the Statue of Liberty. There are different ones depending whether they were sold in the 70s or the 80s, and they all have different stamps in. So I've actually got a few of these, and they're quite fun to look at. So I'm going to talk about three different sort of areas. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the Statue of Liberty, 1886 to the present day. I'm going to talk a little bit about why Lady Liberty appears on so many stamps. And then I'm going to finish off with some personal connections to my collection. And I hope it's not going to be too much. I'm a bit worried I might have too many slides here. But also, I thought we'd have a little competition tonight. And I wondered if anyone out there would be able to name the first stamp to feature the Statue of Liberty. You could put your answers in the Zoom chat if you've got access to that. Or you could just sort of put it in your head. And the answer may surprise you. I'll give you a clue. It's an American stamp. And you might already be thinking which one it is. So if you've got, like I say, if you've got access to the Zoom chat and you think you know what it is, pop it in there. We'll see if you know. Okay. So this is a photo of me visiting the Statue of Liberty with my wife, Kathy, back in 2007. It was freezing cold. It was April. That's why we're both wearing thick coats. And this is what I'm using to illustrate the first stage in the history of the Statue of Liberty. So the Statue of Liberty, it's called the Statue of Liberty Enlightening the World. It was funded by donations in France to build the statue. This is one of 4 miniature sheets produced by Nevis for the centenary of the Statue of Liberty in 1986. Now, there were lots of sheets produced like this, and they were issued by a number of different postal agencies and countries. Some issued as many as 9 sheets. They're all about the same size. They all have a photo picture, a photograph on the stamp in the center, and then often another photo around it. But I particularly like this one because it kind of explains that a gift of friendship from France. And there's a lot around why it was felt that the French nation had contributed so much to the independence and the establishment of the United States of America, but we won't get into that. So the statue was sculpted by a chap called Frederick Bartholdi. He was a very interesting fellow. He liked big monuments. He liked creating big monuments, and one of his first large sculptures was a lion in a place called Belfort to commemorate the siege of Belfort, which lasted for 103 days during the Franco-Prussian War. And the lion, it's 22 meters long, it's 11 meters high. It's sculpted from sandstone. It was originally facing Prussia, but after complaints from the neighbors is where it was turned around to face into France. And you can see it on this stamp. This was issued to commemorate commemorate Bartholdi, and you can see the lion's one side and the Statue of Liberty is the other, and this is a maxi card commemorating that. So the lion was finished in 1880. Bartholdi had already turned to his next project. He wanted to create something that would rival the famous Colossus of Rhodes, which of course was one of the ancient wonders of the world, now lost. And so he set on this idea of creating a giant statue of liberty. And what's interesting sometimes about collecting thematically is you find out other, sort of slightly weird and wonderful things. And so this stamp was released in aid of the centenary. And I think it's quite fitting, really, that someone, a pioneering sort of artist like Frederick Bartholdi, actually his commemorative stamp here was the first US postal stamp to be designed on a computer. And it's quite funny. This is an article telling you how they went about it, describing something that I think most people, or certainly most kids today, would do on their phones without really even thinking that they were doing anything special. But it was a big deal in 1985. And this article from a stamp magazine was given to me actually by Margaret Morris. We had a chat at Stamp World 2010, my first BTA meeting, and she said, "Oh, I've got some Statue of Liberty stuff," and she very kindly sent me a little trove of items, and it included this newspaper clipping. So I want to publicly say thank you to Margaret Morris for encouraging me with my collection. Another partner of Bartholdi's in this, and an interesting fellow in himself, of course, is Gustave Eiffel. And Eiffel was the guy who designed the steel structure that holds the Statue of Liberty up. One of the original ideas was they were going to fill the statue with sand as a way of keeping it up. It would have weighed an absolute ton and probably would have sunk the little island that it's resting on. So Bartholdi went to Eiffel. He said, "What am I going to do here?" And Eiffel said, "Well, playing about with steel and stuff," and put it together. I quite like this stamp from Turks and Caicos because it depicts both of them on there. You often find the Statue of Liberty and the Eiffel Tower on the same stamp, and this is an example here that was issued by Saint-Pierre et Miquelon, so that's quite interesting. And of course, a few years after the Statue of Liberty, that's when the Eiffel Tower was erected. They were both erected in the same decade, and like I say, you find them on the same stamp these days. Another important fella involved in the in making the Statue of Liberty happen as an event was Joseph Pulitzer, and he was one of the key fundraisers based in the United States. He used his newspaper, The World, to solicit donations for the creation of the pedestal. When it was decided it was going to be put on Bledlow's Island, it's now known as Liberty Island in New York Harbor, and over 100,000 people contributed and donated towards the building of the pedestal. So when this stamp was issued in 1947, it's got a famous quote there from Pulitzer: "Our republic and its press will rise or fall together." And in the background, you can see the Statue of Liberty. And Pulitzer, again, this is another one of the Turks and Caicos stamps from that set. And there's Pulitzer in the corner. Right, so how was it built? Well, it was built in parts, and it was erected initially in France. Some parts, well, the whole statue wasn't erected in France. Some parts of it were erected in France for display, and then they were taken over to America. These postcards show parts of the statue on display. You can see actually that the torch there is dated 1876, so that's 10 years before the statue was actually sort of inaugurated in New York, and the head there is 1878. I believe that these photos are taken in France. The torch was also displayed in Philadelphia and in New York for several years before the construction of the statue, as they were trying to raise money to build it. And the statue's the construction process has been sort of recorded on several stamps. A lot of the stamps that were released to commemorate the statue centenary used sort of photos and artist representations of what it might have looked like. So these are some examples of stamps issued for the statue centenary. And some fun facts, I had to put this fact in. The statue is the largest copper structure in the world. I know Andrew will be very excited about that. I was very disappointed he didn't mention it in his talk about copper, but it used 91,000 kilos of copper, and most of the copper came from Norway. It is 46 meters tall, but from the base of the pedestal to the tip of the torch, it's actually 96 meters. And of course, we always think of the Statue of Liberty as being green, and that's because the copper is oxidizing. So originally the statue was brown, and if you look at early postcards of the Statue of Liberty, it's a brown color rather than a green color. And if you look at early drawings and paintings, it's a brown rather than green. And so it's quite interesting. Some of the centenary issues, they sort of like they included a drawing or something of the statue when it had been just newly inaugurated, but they'd drawn it green rather than brown as it would have been. And another fun fact that I quite like is that Liberty Island is actually nearer to New Jersey than New York State. And so that resulted in New Jersey trying to claim ownership of the island and therefore the Statue of Liberty. So a special law was passed to say that anything above the waterline belongs to New York on that island, but everything below the waterline and the water around the island belongs to New Jersey. So if the statue ever toppled over into the water, the state of New Jersey would have the salvage rights. Another interesting thing, and I know some people collect lighthouses, but the Statue of Liberty is actually a working lighthouse. The torch is a very important feature, and it has appeared on stamps in its own right. And this stamp from 1978 shows the original torch, which was replaced in 1986 because it had been so badly corroded. I can't remember where I bought this, but this stamp has been used on a warranty registration that was sent to Dan Wesson Arms. I'm sure we've all heard of Smith & Wesson. This is somebody saying, you know, what they've bought and where they live. It looks like Frank Colombo, who I don't think is related to Detective Colombo. I'm not sure, but I particularly like the line at the bottom, "Have you read your instruction booklet?" And I'm pleased to say that Frank, who sold this gun, sold it to someone who did read their instruction booklet. So that's really good. Gun safety is very, very important. I'm sure we'll all agree. The torch also featured on this postcard that was issued for FIPEX in New York. This was a prepaid postcard. I've got a little wad of these because they were sent by the Rhode Island Philatelic Society to members to advertise their meetings, and I particularly like this one. It tells you that they were having ham at their annual spring dinner, and it was going to cost $2.25, which I thought was. I don't know. We're having ham. Come on, turn up. I think that's great. I'm not sure who Frederick Hawksley was, but he kept all these sort of notices, and I picked them up in a dealer's bargain bin. So why is Lady Liberty so popular? At a certain point, when I put this together, I had 398 different stamp designs. They came from 97 different issuing countries and postal administrations, and I had postmarks, postal stationery, and meter mail. And there's an example of meter mail, and I want to thank Peter Wood for that. He sent me that out of the blue because he'd found it somewhere, and I really like that. And this is a kind of example of how it's been used in meter mail. In this case, it's advertising going to the World's Fair, which was in New York in 1964. And it's the air company encouraging people to travel. If you're going there, then you should use them. And that's been sent from Antwerp. So I have a number of theories why Lady Liberty is so popular, and one is that graphic designers, many of whom I've worked with over the years, graphic designers basically are a bit lazy, and they use shorthand. And so they use this shorthand as to represent the United States of America. And it's a very quick way of depicting a theme. It's like, we need to depict America. What are we going to do? Oh, right, yeah, let's use the Statue of Liberty. And the country that perhaps uses this the most is, unsurprisingly, the United States of America. And here are some examples of definitive stamps that use the statue. But it's been used by other countries as well. So these were stamps issued to mark the 150th anniversary of the US Constitution. And you'll see it's on the Polish stamp there on the right, and it's also quite prominent there on the Spanish stamp. This is a miniature sheet. So you can see how even in the 1930s, not that long after the statue came into being, it was already a very recognizable symbol of America. It was something that people knew about America about 50 years after it had been, less than 50 years after it had been constructed. And when people visit America, or when there are diplomatic links with America, you know, again, let's stick the Statue of Liberty on the stamp. So you've got, you know, here we've got a selection of different countries. I particularly liked the Bulgarian one. There are actually 2 stamps issued during the communist era by Bulgaria that feature the Statue of Liberty on there. I like to think that it was a subversive move by the stamp designer. Let's put a huge symbol of democracy and freedom on one of our stamps. But I don't know. Maybe they were using it ironically or something. But that's something that I particularly like. And here's a couple of other examples of different places where you find these stamps. So 1976 was the anniversary, it was the bicentenary of the United States of America. And a lot of countries used the Statue of Liberty in their stamps marking the bicentenary. These are pages from philatelic passports that were produced for the big Interphil exhibition in Philadelphia in 1976. And you can see there the Bangladesh stamp with the Statue of Liberty on. That's one of a set of 4 stamps, actually. Only one had the statue on. And then obviously San Marino got a set there, and the Statue of Liberty is on one of their stamps as well. And then if you want to get a bit more local and you want to represent New York City, then you'd also use it as well to represent New York. So here's a couple of examples promoting World's Fairs in 1939 and 1964. And so it's used to represent New York City. If something's happening in New York, the likelihood is the Statue of Liberty will feature on the stamp, including for philatelic events. So Cypex or Cipex in 1947. I presume it's a soft C. I don't really know. No one's ever pronounced that to me. And again, this is the other Bulgarian stamp, you know, that was issued during the communist era. And then and Monaco in 1947 issued a strip as well. This strip from Monaco represents the postage cost of sending a letter from Monaco to New York, which I think is quite a nice touch. And I do quite like that big red stamp on the left there with the plane banking in the background. That's quite nicely done. This then in FIPEX, which was in 1957, the USA issued a special miniature sheet featuring imperforate versions of those Liberty Series stamps that I showed earlier. And this was actually legal postage, so you do find it stuck on envelopes and used. It was used on the first day cover, but it was also stuck on various envelopes for, you know, just, well, you find it cut down on all kinds of envelopes actually, which is quite funny sometimes. It's, you know, sometimes you wonder whether people should be using it quite that way. And then to bring it up to date, hang on a second, I've got a problem here. Oh, there we go. Bring it up to date. The New York Stamp Show in 2016, we had the Royal Mail Smilers sheet, and although there isn't a stamp featuring the Statue of Liberty, they did have it on the Smiler sheet in the background there. I kind of include things like this in. It's a philatelic material. The great thing from a collector's point of view, if you are collecting the Statue of Liberty on stamps, is that the New York Stamp Show logo, which you can see in the top right corner there, features the Statue of Liberty, and quite a few stamp issues related to this stamp show will feature that logo on the stamp or on the miniature sheet or something. So even if it's sort of not a picture of the Statue of Liberty, you've got the Statue of Liberty there in the logo. That's all quite handy. A few BTA members went to the New York Stamp Show, and I want to say thank you to Wendy for bringing me back some bits and bobs from there. Really appreciated it. All those items are in my collection, and I do really appreciate that. Another topic that it's used for is just generally foreign travel or air travel, and this is the kind of interesting cover you end up with. So in 1930, Brazil put the Statue of Liberty on their airmail stamp, and it's a bit of an abstract theme, really, foreign travel. But the Statue of Liberty, like I say, is used when people are trying to indicate somewhere, you know, far, far away, traveling over the ocean. And you can literally see that on this kind of Brazilian stamp there with the sun going down in the background. This cover is quite random. It was sent by a company called Laminex Limited, who up until recently were still trading, actually. I don't know if they've disappeared now, but during the Second World War, they were a razor blade manufacturer. You can see the guy holding some razor blades there quite sort of casually. Does look like he's about to drop them and slice his hand open. It's obviously been through a censor because it was a wartime mail. And it's got several of these stamps tied by cancel to it, and it's also suffered some water damage. I'm not sure whether that is just a later thing or whether there was some drama in its postal journey or not. I know we have some South American collectors in the association. Not sure if you're here tonight. We did have, well, I think you might be, because we were just talking about it actually. Problems with mail from Brazil. We were talking about that beforehand, and here you go. Here's an envelope from Brazil, which I felt I really should include. This is another example of which you get a lot, actually. First flight covers, anywhere first flight to America, anywhere first flight to New York in particular, will likely have the Statue of Liberty on. I quite like this because you got the Statue of Liberty on the stamp with a really nice postmark, sort of like providing a halo for her. And also you've got the the sort of like design, the block print design on the left-hand side with the Statue of Liberty as well. So that was so, you know, I picked that up. I was like, oh, that's great. And the great thing about collecting something as random as this is, you know, these are not expensive covers by a long shot. And again, bringing it up to date, Royal Mail Post and Go in 2015. This is a first day cover, and you can see in the bottom center there a depiction of New York City and the Statue of Liberty. I quite like these stamps, actually. I don't think I've ever seen one in the wild, as it were. I've only ever seen them on philatelic covers. I don't know what that says about Post and Go, really. So lots of different topics and themes that have been used. I could have done you a few slides for each of these, but I think everybody would have been very tired by the end of that, to be honest. And but if you've got a sort of idea of you know, a theme that you wanted to illustrate using the Statue of Liberty, you pretty much could. And some of these are a bit ironic, and some of them are sort of, you know, quite sort of precise in what they do. And I just want to show you two more, and just to show you how you can really illustrate quite anything. And the first illustration is the theme of peace. And so these are two stamps that were issued on the theme of peace. Now, this is when I need to check the chat, because did anybody say? Did anybody say? No, nobody said Uruguay as the Uruguay 1919 as the first stamps to feature the Statue of Liberty. I did say it was an American stamp, but I didn't say United States of America. So there you go. But there you go. Yeah. So the first stamps to be produced, and that was to commemorate the end of the First World War. And so the Statue of Liberty was seen as a symbol of peace. And here she is with flowers in her hair. The Republic of the Marshall Islands, killing two birds with one stone, to, you know, both the Statue of Liberty Centennial and the United Nations International Year of Peace in 1986. And then, as a contrast to that, we have this patriotic cover, which has the Statue of Liberty on a stamp next to a stamp featuring a whopping big anti-aircraft cannon, a US Navy postmark, and, you know, a patriotic sort of slogan, "Without freedom, liberty dies." And of course, this was issued November the 5th, 1941. And it just shows how the Statue of Liberty has been used in different ways. So you're going from this idea of it being peace, the end of war, to sort of patriotism in wartime. And I just find that quite interesting. And that sort of, they're not necessarily exclusive ideas, but they are a little bit different in their sort of approach. chucking this just to sort of as an interesting, fun little thing. This came out in 2011. The US Postal Service issued their Liberty Forever stamps and included a picture that wasn't actually the Statue of Liberty. They said it was, and they thought it was, but it was actually a replica. It's a photo of the replica that's outside the New York casino in Las Vegas. And they also got in trouble for using this photo without permission, and the photographer sued them. So it was a mistake on many levels. It wasn't just not the Statue of Liberty, but it also wound them up in some hot water. So I've talked a little bit about the history of the statue, and I've talked a little bit about some of the themes that come out of my collection, and I realize I've rattled through those quite fast. I hope everybody's been able to sort of keep up. I wanted to finish with talking about some personal connections I have with my collection. And these are some postcards that have been sent to me by and also sent to family members. So one of those postcards is from my wife to me when she went to visit, when she went to America with her sister, and she sent me a postcard back of the Statue of Liberty. And another postcard there was sent from my my wife's uncle to her grandma, to say hi, that he was in New York as well. And so that sort of made its way into my possession over the years as well. It was actually my wife, it was Kathy's visit to the Statue of Liberty, and that made me think, I wonder how many stamps I got featuring the Statue of Liberty. So that was kind of the prompt for this entire collection, because then I went through various books I had, and I found more than I'd expected. And then I made that fatal mistake, or well, not mistake, fatal decision to put a search into eBay, and saw hundreds of things come back. And I thought, oh, okay, there's lots here. And then I started collecting them, and the rest is history. So so that's kind of that. This postcard is actually quite important in terms of prompting me to start collecting. Now, just step in, just to illustrate my next point about this, my next connection. For many millions of new Americans, Lady Liberty, you know, there's a phrase that Lady Liberty lifts her lamp above the golden door. It was one of the first sights of America for families seeking a better life in the New World, particularly at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th centuries. And the statue, you know, was included there as the background on these stamps that were issued by San Marino, which was, you know, that was to commemorate emigration. And also you can see it on the cancellation on this joint cover, commemorating Irish emigration to America. And I know Peter collects a lot to do with the Irish diaspora. He probably knows this, but I didn't know this till looking it up. But there are actually more people living in the USA who identify as Irish than the current population of Ireland, because so many went and settled there and had families, and you know, held on to their Irish roots. So yeah, so that's the thing. And the reason I show you that, and the reason I talk about emigration, is because one of the people who emigrated at the start of the 20th century was my great-great-uncle, Robert Bostock. And in 1905, Robert left the village of Brumbo near Wrexham to seek his fortune in America. And he traveled on a ship called the Oceanic, and my dad found Robert's name listed in the arrivals log on Ellis Island in New York Harbor, where the Oceanic docked. So my great-great-uncle, as he was arriving in America, would have sailed right past the Statue of Liberty and probably saw it himself. So after Ellis Island, Robert traveled inland to a place called Mahoney City in Pennsylvania. We know that because it says on the back of this photo where it was taken. It's got the photographer's address on there. And then from Mahoney City, he made his way across the country to Los Angeles, where he worked for the Metropolitan Life Insurance Agency for a number of years. A couple of years after arriving in America, he got married. He and his wife had 2 children. And he lived the rest of his life in America. He passed away age 54 in 1932. He never returned home to Wrexham. My great-grandmother never saw her brother again. She saw the photos that he sent home. And she also had, in the family archive, we also have this, which is a postcard that Robert sent back in 1917. And it fits rather nicely with my collecting theme, because there on the postcard is the Statue of Liberty. And this isn't in my collection, it's in the family photo archive album. But I thought you'd like to see it. I've been fortunate enough to be able to scan everything that's in that archive. There's no stamp on it, and we don't know what happened to the stamp. That's been lost. It's clearly been sort of ripped off at some point. But this is actually dated the 23rd of May, 1917, and on the back, it's a bit difficult to make out exactly what he says, but he talks about America entering the war. And it's interesting because we know from army records that in 1918, Robert had become a US citizen, and he, which is probably why he wrote the good old American flag on the front. He actually joined the American army, and because he wanted to, well, I don't know. I wonder what went through his mind, why he joined the army in 1918. Possibly it's because he felt that, you know, he wanted to sort of help out, you know, back in Europe, you know. And although he was sort of, we went through basic training in the army, peace broke out before he actually transferred overseas, and he left the army and went back to his job as an insurance salesman. So there you go. So I think it's interesting. You've got this sort of little note here, and that's what another, I feel, quite a personal connection to this collection. It just goes to show that the Statue of Liberty has been quite meaningful in our family for some time. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. That was wonderful. It was most interesting.